Alright, well, let's take a look at some examples of solving more absolute value equations. So we're in section P3, and I'm looking in the homework on page 32. So let's take a look at something like, say, 48. .48 tells us that the absolute value of 2x minus 3 and then subtract 1 should be equal to 0. What are the values of x that make this equation true? Well, we're going to start off. Remembered, I didn't follow through with all my steps in the last video, so I'll try to be more diligent this time. Step 1 is to isolate the absolute values. So in this case, that means we're going to have to add 1 to both sides. So we'll get absolute value of 2x minus 3. That should equal 1. The next step is to split equation into 2 and drop the absolute values. Because we're asking ourselves, okay, the absolute value of what numbers could give us 1? Well, the absolute value of 1 could give us 1. So one way this could work is if what's inside the absolute values is equal to 1. That's one way we can escape the absolute value. The other way you can escape the absolute value is if 2x minus 3 is equal to negative 1. Because the absolute value of negative 1, if this is negative 1, the absolute value of it is still positive 1. So we got our equation, it's split into 2, and now finish it off. So we'll add 3 to both sides. On both equations. 3 plus a minus 1, that's just 3 minus 1, or 2. So then dividing by 2, 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And those are our two answers. So let's take a look at another example. I'm going to mix up 50 a little bit because I just want to get the basics of solving absolute values down. We don't need to get into anything any more complicated. So let's say what we have here is that the absolute value of x squared minus 4 is equal to 5. So following our pattern, the first step is to isolate the absolute value. But in this case, that's already done. So we move on to our second step, which is to split up the equation and drop the absolute values. So if what's inside, if the absolute value of some number is supposed to be 5, that number, in this case, that number is x squared minus 4, could be 5, or What's inside the absolute values could be -5. So our equations split. There are no absolute values in sight. We're back into familiar territory. Just proceed as normal. So we'll add 4 to both sides. So for the first equation, we get x squared equals 9. For the second equation, we get x squared equals, now adding 4, minus 5 plus 4 is just 4 minus 5. So that's a -1. Now it looks like the next step here would be to take square roots of both sides. And when you do that, don't forget, you need to add in a plus or minus on at least on one side. But over here we run into a problem, because we're not supposed to take square roots of negative numbers. So that doesn't lead us anywhere. We get stuck being forced to do something we're not allowed to do. But we have another option. We had 2 equations. Now it's just back down to 1 equation to solve. So x could be plus or minus 3. And that's the solution to this particular problem.